Welcome to the Nano podcast. I'm your host, Will Chernlin, and I'm excited to have you join me on this journey through the world of nano-cap companies. For the past decade, I've talked to thousands of business owners across various industries. It's been an enlightening experience revealing the vast tapestries of entrepreneurship and innovation that thrives beneath the surface of mainstream media coverage. Each week, I will interview different leaders of nano-cap publicly traded companies to learn about their history, what they do now, and their future. As a reminder, none of this information is financial advice, and it is all for entertainment purposes only. Let's start this week's episode. Welcome to the NanoCap podcast. On this week's episode, we have Anthony Ambrose, CEO of DAIO, stock ticker DAIO. DAIO engages in the designing, manufacturing, and sale of programming and security deployment systems and services for electronic devices for manufacturers all around the world. Anthony, thanks for being on the podcast.
Well, thank you very much, Will. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I like to always kind of start before your LinkedIn starts. So previous to 1997, what were you up to in your life? Where were you working at? Where did you go to school? Where are you from?
Well, I originally I was born in New Jersey, finished high school in Ridgefield, Connecticut, basically New York metro area. And went to Princeton to study chemical engineering and graduated there in 1980. Had a lot of fun there, really learned a lot, met a lot of amazing people, but decided, I really just wanted to get to Silicon Valley. So I kept interviewing. I kept getting interviews with oil companies and other places, and I finally got an interview with Intel fairly late in the game. And they liked me, I liked them, so I went to work for them in Livermore, California, in a semiconductor fabrication plant. And I really enjoyed that. That was fantastic.
It's funny, you sound like Mark Andreessen, who says he got to Silicon Valley in like 1995 and he came late to the game too. I don't know if I'd call 1997 late to the game, but I guess that must have been a kind of a few years of you out east hoping to go out to Silicon Valley between you graduating Princeton and getting over to Intel.
Well, no, I did. I got to Intel in '83.
Oh, did you? Oh, you got there right away.
Yeah,
okay.
So I was late in the game in terms of the college interviewing year. So, yeah, I spent 23 years there, worked in semiconductor fabrication, product marketing on microprocessors, memory products, went into sales for a while, helped develop a chip and sell it to Nokia for the first smartphone. That was really cool. A lot of trips back and forth to Finland. And, eventually became general manager of a fairly large organization. And, the organization was deemed not to be strategic. So I said, well, why don't we sell it? So I quit and then went to a company and ended up buying most of my organization. It was one of the great M&A stories of all time because I knew exactly what I wanted, who I wanted, and not to overpay. So it worked out really well.
So to take a step back, a little bit more about your life at Intel. Intel was the center of the universe at that moment, with Andy Grove being the Time Person of the Year. Did you ever get to meet Andy? And what was the just general culture like there being the center of the whole tech universe?
We did get to meet Andy, and be careful what you wish for sometimes, right? First time I was at the company about 6 months, and he actually came out to the fab and did a lunch. And it was I probably was kind of young and in his face a little bit, but if anyone knows Andy, that didn't intimidate him very much. But I love the Intel culture. It was very direct. Some people didn't like it because it was direct, and I think later on some people took it to an extreme. But the foundation of how I'm trying to run my company here is we put the issues on the table. We're hard on issues. We don't have to be hard on people. I think that's the thing I learned maybe after Intel. But if you ignore something, it doesn't go away. It just gets worse. So you might as well figure it out. You might as well put it on the table. You might as well talk about it. And, technical problems can be solved. All right. There's nothing here that we're trying to do. I mean, there are people out there in the world right now trying to go to Mars. That's a real interesting challenge with a lot of things that have yet to be solved. What we're trying to do is build the world's greatest products in programming. And we think we know what it takes to do that. And we've been doing it, for 12 years here. I told people, whatever you work on in the future, you can always tell people you worked on the best products that were available in the industry. And I had that happen when I was at Intel consistently. And it's a real good motivator for people in engineering when they can figure out they're working on the best. And that's what we need to do. We're not the low cost guys in the world. We're not trying to, put out something that's, super cheap and then breaks in 2 years. So it better be good technically, and you better be able to stand behind it, and you better have fun with the technology. That's probably another thing that I don't know if I learned it at Intel, but I've always been curious about technology and things and why they work a certain way. And curiosity is something that helps you in engineering. It helps you, I think, as a CEO. Why does this market behave the way it does? Why are these people doing what they're doing? Why aren't they doing things this way? And it helps you, I think, identify some areas of opportunity.
I've noticed in almost every entrepreneur I've talked to, every business owner I've talked to, that yes, they have the most random hobbies because they are so curious and everything. And so that definitely seems to be a trait that I see between many people. So you alluded to a business deal earlier. Was that with Radisys, or where did Radisys come into the picture?
I left Intel to go to a company called Radisys. I'd been running a telecom boards division, and we helped create a standard in the industry called ATCA, basically a blade architecture for servers and packet processing engines that could be standardized and take a lot of cost out of telecom infrastructure. And Intel had a big presence there. Again, the super geniuses in the consulting industry determined that telecom wasn't strategic, and they're questioning Intel's CEO at the time why he was in this business. And I fought it for a while, and then I said, why am I fighting this? If they want to just divest it, it's not that big a deal. And the way Intel was accounting for it, they had lumped a whole lot of corporate allocation on this, and I knew that if you got rid of the corporate allocation, this thing would be a license to print money. So, I went to Radisys. We bought half of my old division, took 75 people instead of the 300 that Intel had running it. And it was accretive inside of 30 days. And it was a $100 million business that we picked up for $30 million. So, it worked out.
It's literally every disgruntled employee's dream. Is that you go, no, if you guys just took out all the bureaucracy and just let me run this the way I run it, this could be printing cash.
Disgruntled will be too strong a word, because I really did like Intel. I was sitting there going, now I know what Wall Street means when they say something is mispriced. Okay. And, we might as well take advantage of it as opposed to giving it to someone that had no stake in it. And, we got to bring the right people with us. It was actually a lot of fun. And it created a lot of value for the Radisys people as well.
I can imagine the consultants are worried about the innovator's dilemma, and it's too small of a portion of the business.
The challenge Intel had at the time was, they had run basically the world was x86 and PCs till about 1998, and then it was the strategy was called segmentation. So how to go beyond the PC. And this is something that I really enjoyed quite a bit, because I'd done x86 for smartphones, ended up running the server product line, the Xeon, which was, highly profitable. I think, for 20 years, it was the most profitable part of the company. But at the same time, Intel acquired, a lot of companies and didn't really figure out a formula to successfully integrate them. And it's a shame, because they had a leadership position in what you'd call cloud computing today. With Amazon and Microsoft have a leading position. Intel had that 25 years ago and didn't know how to turn it into a really good business. We had all these network technologies and communication technologies that the company didn't know how to create its own organization to allow these new divisions to be successful. If it wasn't a microprocessor, it basically got squeezed. And, I'll give credit to Pat Gelsinger. I think he's trying to change that at Intel, and he's, putting his money where his mouth is. But, that was a challenge 20 years ago, and it never really got solved until the current administration.
That's very, very interesting. So to get back to DAIO, I kind of just like to start from the very beginning. As I was looking into the history, it looked like it was founded not too far from where Microsoft was founded, but just 5 years earlier.
Yeah.
So, tell me about the history before you came on board.
Well, we did a little research for our 50th anniversary a couple years ago, and the founders of DAIO were really, really interesting tech pioneers. they essentially invented the device programmer. Okay, and this was something that was absolutely necessary because, if you have a chip is a paperweight until you put data into it, right, and get it to do something. And that wasn't the question. Became, well, how do you put data into a chip, right? So you have to have a way to talk to it. Back then, it was very much custom development for each architecture. And DAIO figured out how to build the device programmer, and for engineers, that was the thing to have on your desk before a PC was the thing to have on your desk, or before a workstation. And I can't tell you how many people I run into at trade shows or industry events, and they all have gray hair. And they all go, I used to use DAIO on my, computer science class or at my first job. And, it's a testament to the fact that the company invented a category of programmer. And, the challenge was like most businesses, it went through forced pivots. Okay. It's one thing to pivot, to a new opportunity. It's another thing to be pivoted or die. Right. And so the manual programming business got taken over by the semi houses in the early 90s, when you could, create a little pod and stick it onto a PC for $500 instead of a $30,000 device programmer. So the company had to move into automation and manufacturing, did so. And, when I came on board, it was right sort of at the end of a pivot. I call it DAIO 2.0, where we were very, very important in the wireless industry, programming memory chips for wireless mobile phones. And then that business rapidly consolidated, literally as I was walking in the door. 6 months on the job, RIM came out with their new phone that was supposed to be the answer to the iPhone. And RIM was our biggest customer, and they'd placed an order for 20 machines to support the rollout of this new phone. And I remember picking up the Wall Street Journal. Back then, I picked up a newspaper. Now you get everything online, but still read the newspaper. And, people were saying this phone really wasn't going to, beat Apple and maybe even worse. And I remember thinking, this is the oh no moment that one of my mentors had warned me about. He goes, you're going to be a CEO and it's all going to be fine. And then you're going to get this piece of information. And he used stronger language than oh no, but I'll keep it G-rated on the podcast here. And I said, okay, here's my oh no moment. Now what are we going to do about it? Well, the initial mandate when I came on was get the company growing again, and I determined that we needed to refresh the product line to do that. So we were well on our way to doing that. But I needed about a year to get the new product out the door and not burn through all the cash we had in the bank, so the board wouldn't squeeze me too hard on spending money for R&D. And so literally I went downstairs to the manufacturing manager and I said, Gordon, we need to get these machines out for the RIM contractors ASAP, because I think if the Wall Street Journal is any indication, they're going to realize that they've ordered way too many for their demand. And so we shipped them out, and we got paid on them. And then sure enough, a couple months later, people ringing up the phone saying, hey, we don't need these anymore. Do you want them back? And I said, no, we really don't want them back. Thank you for asking, and thank you for paying your bills on time. And oh, by the way, I've got a new system here that I think you're really going to like, and that's called the PSV. It's called the PSV 7. But to give you an idea of some of the challenges that you face, RIM and another company, a Korean cell phone company, not Samsung, were 38% of our business my first year as CEO, and that went to 0 3 years later. So not only did I have to get the whole product line redone, but the revenue that we thought we could count upon to help us through this transition, in fact, that what we designed the product for, was gone. And we got the team together, said, all right, what are we going to do? Wireless is not the answer. And, as one of my other mentors showed me, sometimes you just got to sit and look at your sales out reports and figure out who's buying your stuff. And, the number 2 market for us, about 24% at the time, was automotive electronics. And they said, what's going to go on in automotive? And we quickly figured out that where automotive was going to change pretty rapidly, and it was going to go to the type of problem that we just solved for the wireless industry, namely how to program big flash. And I remember going to some of our customers in Europe, and I gave a talk at an industry trade show about how the world was going to change in automotive and how these analog displays were going to be replaced by digital displays that essentially were iPads with custom configuration, result in a 10,000x increase in programming content. And I said, and it's going to break your factory, okay? And you know what? You're not going to know about it because your engineers aren't telling you about it, but don't worry. When your factory is breaking, call DAIO. We've already got the answer for you. And, that's a pretty provocative message to deliver at an industry trade show. But again, I learned from, one of the masters of that, Sean Maloney at Intel, if you're going to talk at an event, be provocative, be memorable. And sure enough, we had customers 6 months later calling us and saying, yeah, remember when we said we didn't need that? Well, we got the new product in and we got the new ramp, and we need your machine. How many can you get us like now? And that was a huge year for us. We also competed successfully for a big deal at Bosch, which is the largest deal in the history of the company. It turned out to be about a $25 million deal all in. And, that transformed the company and really cemented the roadmap and strategy around that we're on today, which we call automotive first.
So you mentioned mentors a couple times. This is kind of a question I have for almost every CEO that kind of got into your position is, did you go to a night class? Did you lean on your mentor? There's one thing to run a business, another thing to run a publicly traded business. Where did you learn all that, the kind of ins and outs, the legalities, and the different kind of rituals you'd have to do?
I hate to break the news to someone who's, just finishing up their second year of business school, but you just don't go right from school to running a public company. At least I don't think I could have done that. The first thing I had to learn, and Intel is a great place, is, show up early, take aggressive goals, meet and exceed those goals, and, play for something that's worth playing for. And, Intel was great in that. Then when I moved on, it's like, okay, don't let the bureaucracy get in the way when you're in a smaller company. I could not have gone directly from Intel to DAIO. There'd have been too much, it'd be like getting the bends, from coming up too fast from scuba diving, because Intel had resources everywhere. In fact, sometimes they had 2 or 3 people doing the same thing in different organizations, maybe even competing against each other. Radisys was a smaller company, but still had, pretty good resources. It was $300 million. And, my CEO there, Scott Grout, was a very, very sharp guy and, very, very good coach for me. The difference when you go to a public company as a CEO, and again, this is a quote from Scott, you're on the trapeze and there's no net. Okay, you can make mistakes when you're lower in the organization and get away with it, turn it into a learning experience. There are certain things you can't make a mistake on as a public company CEO and ever recover. Okay, so the important thing is, the financials have to be right all the time, period, full stop. You also have to create how you want to deal with investors. And in a lot of nanocap companies, there are a lot of promoters. There are a lot of people that are trying to, sell snake oil. We try and do it a little bit differently. We're pretty much right about the facts. This is what we see in the market. If we think there's a problem, we let investors know this is a problem. We don't like this, or we think something is good. And, you're going to always have an opportunity to either delight or make investors angry. So you might as well do it, in a straightforward way and honestly, so they trust you. And, that's probably the single biggest thing that when you're running a company, you got to maintain the trust. You can survive a bad quarter, you can survive a misstep, and okay, we did something stupid on the product line, but you can't ever survive a loss of trust.
And so, to speak to that trusted customer, another person you need trust from is your board of directors. So when you came in the first couple of years, lost 30% of the revenue through a market change, and then decided you wanted to go into and focus more on automotive. How is the board of directors when you've signed on? Did they change over time? How do they feel about those changes?
Well, remember when you join on as a first-time CEO, right? You have to bring something to the table because you're going to have to learn how to be a public company CEO. So what I brought to the table was product expertise and an understanding of how to get things done and get a good product out the door. I didn't understand investor relations. I didn't understand public company governance and finance. I mean, I did at a high level, but not at a level where, I don't know if the first time you sign the first financial statement and you realize, you're signing your life away here. And I think I've signed 45 of them now, maybe even more if you include annual reports. But it's just, this is serious business. And the board set me up for success because I had a very talented CFO who was excellent at public company governance, and I had a strong legal department. The other thing Intel did was train me very well how to work within the rules and the laws around, trade and things like that. So the defensive team that I had in place at DAIO was already there, so I didn't have to worry too much about that. Because as a CEO, you're going to bring certain skills to the table. And, people now they say, well, what's your superpower? Okay. Well, you have to do, it's nice to be able to do one thing really, really well. But no matter how smart you are, what kind of superhero you are, there's going to be a blind spot or there's an area that you just don't have any experience in. And mine was finance. So, let's get a great finance partner. And I think that really helped the first couple of years.
I was going to ask, what would you say DAIO's moat is, but I might change it to now you used it. What is DAIO's superpower?
The superpower is we know what you need in programming even before you do it. And if you just sit down and trust us, the people that have done that and trusted us to take care of them have done really, really well. Those people value a platform. They value forward scalability. They value being able to adopt new technology seamlessly. There's also a segment of the market that doesn't care about any of that and wants a cheap acquisition price. And, they get what they pay for. So the challenge we have is a lot of our customers that have engaged with us on that value creation methodology that I described have done really, really well. We take good care of them. And then I've had a lot of people come to us and say, oh, gosh, I wish I'd have bought you, but I bought the other guy because they were $3,000 cheaper on a $200,000 machine. And, but, now I'm stuck with it. And I'm like, well, I wish I could help you, but, you can throw the old one away and buy us, but I can't buy back their machine. Right.
Yeah. You can't do trade-ins.
Well, we do a trade-in, but I mean, I can't give them what's on their books, right? Which is usually a stumbling block.
Yeah.
But the hardest thing to do is to really let people know that if you buy DAIO, no one got fired for buying DAIO. Okay, to use the old term that used to be associated with a great company, IBM.
Yeah.
We know your programming demands. We know what you're going to need to do. Like this conversation I had with the automotive guys around, look, I got you covered on Big Flash. We've already solved the problem. And some people will listen to you. Some people don't, either because they don't know you well enough or they just don't trust suppliers, or they have a different agenda that they just don't want to have to worry about programming. But we like to say programming matters. Your choice of programmer can determine whether you have a great supplier when something like COVID hits. So, Will, one of the biggest challenges I had as a CEO is, what do you do when COVID hits and you have your entire Shanghai operation shut out of their office for 75 days, starting the week before the close of a quarter, okay? And there's nothing you can do about it. Well, we ended up not putting any customers' lines down because we had a resilient manufacturing strategy. We ended up not laying anybody off because it's really important to keep good people. And we ended up not losing any customers. Now, underneath all that, there was a lot of churn. There were a lot of angst. There were a lot of gray hair. But if you focus on, all right, well, which customer needs the part? How do we get it to them? What do we need to do differently? And then when people came back, how do we ship stuff? How do we make sure people stay healthy? And then the whole supply chain dynamics, how do we make sure that we don't get the shaft here when people are raising prices and on certain critical components? And one of the benefits is that experience I had at Intel and at Radisys and elsewhere, where you see the semiconductor cycle, you sort of know how people behave. When things get tight, big companies scoop up all the extra capacity and sit on it until they know they can get whatever they want, and then they dump that extra capacity on the market. And so, 2 days a year, the market's in balance. The other 364 days or 3 days a year, it's either in a shortage or a glut. And so, for example, we decided that, okay, we're gonna go take some of our balance sheet and put it into inventory to make sure that we have parts and we can support customers. And we dealt with a lot of shortages, but we were dealing with shortages that were going to be out 6 months, not 6 days. And again, that's just something you get from having seen a number of industry cycles, where I get all this gray hair from. It's just like, okay, we've seen this movie before. We know how it ends. And until it ends, we're going to make sure that we get the inventory. And then last year we said, all right, we got enough parts. We'll get rid of the inventory and turn it back into cash.
So that's one of the challenges I can imagine with, I think of the chip shortages and the automotive, I think of the COVID supply chains. What about the geopolitical climate with 90% of your revenues coming from outside the U.S.? How have you all been able to navigate that and the currency exchanges and all that?
So let me start with the easy one, currency exchange. We're self-hedging in a couple of ways because, we have people in China. We sell products in China. So to a certain extent, whatever we get in local currency, we pay out in local currency, and that's fine. We're somewhat hedged in Europe on the euro because, again, we have people in Germany. Now, we're not 100% hedged, but we made a decision early on that we're just going to we're going to sell the product and let the currency fluctuation do what it's going to do. And people said, well, why don't you buy a hedge? And I said, okay, great. Tell me which hedge I should buy, the dollar getting stronger or the dollar getting weaker. And they go, I don't know. And I go, who knows? And they go, well, some guy making $10 million a year on the trading desk. I said, all right, well, if I knew which way the hedge was going to go, I'd be making $10 million a year on the trading desk, okay? It'd be a lot easier than what I'm doing now. Since I don't know, I'm not going to spend the money on guesswork. It's like going to Vegas and, you're wondering why you walk away with no money. Well, the house has an advantage on every transaction. So we just, we let the cards fall where they may, and the dollar has gone up, the dollar has gone down, and it's about where I think it was when I started. And sometimes, you take a hit on the P&L that's not fair. Other times you get a benefit on the P&L that's not really earned. But we just decided, for example, on currency, we're just going to let it go. By far a bigger challenge is culture. And you need to understand that not everyone thinks like an American. Now, I'm very fortunate. I have people that speak outstanding English as a second language, but it doesn't mean their culture is American. But it turns out an American culture is not a bad place to be if you're working with folks in China and Germany. Everybody likes to have a 2x2 box. I call it the MBA in a can. Open it up and you got a 2x2 matrix on something. And, getting people in China and Germany to communicate effectively is about the hardest problem there is culturally and linguistically. So having them come through the United States actually is not bad. And you realize you need to treat people fairly, but what's effective management for a Chinese subsidiary is very different than what's effective management for a German subsidiary. Okay. Same thing with customers. They have different expectations. And it's not just the contractual expectations, but non-spoken, non-written down expectations of good customer support. And learning, and again, I had the benefit. I was working with China since the mid-90s. I was working with Germany since the late 80s. I was working with Japanese customers since the late 80s. And there's no substitute for experience in how people react. When is it appropriate to bring something up in a meeting versus when is it appropriate to have a couple of beers at dinner and then bring it up? Okay. And what are the expectations that people have of a boss? They expect the boss to tell them what to do, or they expect the boss to listen and ratify a decision that they've already made. So, in terms of development to be a CEO, one of the things I do is get as much international experience as you could possibly get. You obviously can't get to every country, but you pick two or three, you sort of understand the formula of how to be more effective.
It's interesting with your examples too, because I've at least a dozen times I've been to Germany and China the most, probably of any countries. And so it's interesting to use those examples as me doing business with them and such. And when it's appropriate to bring up certain things, all of that totally rings true to me. And so I know that's it's weird how much it reflects my lived experience. So as we start kind of wrapping up here, DAIO has little to no debt, has a bunch of cash on the balance sheet. What's the future of DAIO in 5-10 years? How do you spend that cash to turn it into shareholder value?
That's a good question, Will. One of the things we pride in, and having that balance sheet certainly helped us through COVID and things like that. But that is more cash than we need to run the business. And right now, with where interest rates are going, and I think staying, raising, that cash is very, very valuable to us. And I think I'd really like to put it to work to go do something accretive from an M&A standpoint. It's a little bit challenging because of our size and what we want to do, but I think that would be my preferred use. Getting the business bigger because, we have fixed costs for being public. If I were to double the size of the company, the fixed cost tax gets cut in half, and it certainly would be useful to be able to do that. So we want to put the cash to work to grow the company, whether that's organic or inorganic. Anything we do would probably have to be accretive, knowing the nature of our investors who tend to be very value oriented. And so, that's where I think we'd be able to do there.
And I have to ask as a follow-up, since it's the buzzword of the day, where are you all in terms of trying to embrace AI from a chip manufacturing point of view or just from an internal process point of view?
Well, I think that there are opportunities everywhere. And, our ticker symbol is DAIO or DAIO. So, I mean, the middle part of our ticker symbol is AI. So we got that going for us. But, I mentioned this in our earnings call just a couple of days ago. The real interesting thing for us is in this term we call edge AI. And you read a lot about Chat GPT and other things like that, where they take all this information, put it up in the cloud and scour everything and then come up with some pretty interesting stuff. But there are a lot more narrow decisions that are trying to be made in things, for example, like autonomous driving and active safety. So if I have a LiDAR signal or a radar signal, and, a good example today, we just read in the news, the government's going to mandate that you have to have this active braking subsystem in your car now. I call it the mother-in-law brake. Slow down, you're driving too fast, you're too close. But that's going to be in every car now. Imagine that. Everyone gets a mother-in-law in their own car, and it's embedded in the system. You can't do anything about it. People say, well, why does the AI being at the edge matter? Well, it's one thing to have a small code base that just operates the system and says, yep, capture the signal, organizing it. It's another to have intelligence built in that requires a fair amount of code to apply machine learning algorithms on those signals and get them updated. When you boil down our business, the more code that goes into stuff, the more programming demand there is. So in terms of unit growth, the fact that there is an active braking system is good for business. The fact that it's going to have a much larger code size now because it's going to have edge AI functionality built into it is also very, very good for business. So on a demand side, edge AI is really good for us. And I could go through examples in IoT and smart homes and things like that.
No, it makes me think of just back to Mark Andreessen, just software is eating the world. And there needs to be some sort of little component for all that software to be able to eat the world.
And we're the waiters that serve the food up to the software that's eating the world.
Exactly. Okay, very cool. Sorry to interrupt. You had another.
No, some internal processes. We're looking at things there. Some of them might be so interesting that I don't want my competitors to hear about it on your podcast. So they'll have to figure it out when we announce it in the market, and I'll give you a heads up when we do that.
Awesome. Sounds good. Well, that's all I have for us today, Anthony. Thank you so much for coming on the NanoCap podcast. And if anybody would like to learn a bit more about DAIO and what you're up to, where's the best place for them to go?
www. Our website, DATAIO.com. And you'll find our products. We'll probably have a link to the podcast as well and other things.
and
some cool stuff we're doing as a company as well.
Awesome. Thanks again, Anthony. And for those of you still listening, please remember to subscribe and review, and we'll see you all soon.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not provide financial, legal, or any other advice. The information is not investment advice or any offer to buy or sell any securities or to make any investment. The views expressed by the guests are their own, and any reference to third-party products, services, or information does not constitute an endorsement, therefore, by NanoCap Podcast or its affiliates. The NanoCap Podcast Express disclaims all liability for any individual's use of the information presented